Welcome to this video explanation for the Urban Samurai character or Tech Ninja. Let's start. Actually, I wanted to make this video to give you more about how I create characters based on references and how I was thinking throughout the whole painting process. Before we start, I just wanted to tell you that this video is mainly focusing on rendering and material rendering and how I use these techniques to make this character. A few words on how I usually start the process of making a new character. I'm not just collecting references as you see here on the left side, right, on my cursor. Also on the right side I have some reference about the hood and the mask. But apart from all this, I also tend to collect some other references that I am using for inspiration, kind of like a mini mood board, let's call it like that I am using in order to get inspired by other artists that I have done similar maybe characters on the field or things that inspire me for this character. So I have this kind of reference collected here in order to get some ideas on how to proceed further. Alright, so let's now go through the process and I will show you slowly how I treat this and how I go about it. So as you can see, the main reference here is this person and also has this sword. So when I saw this reference, I said, oh, that's a cool idea to make a kind of a samurai character, but more of a modern samurai character. My first things is to try to analyze the reference by not just looking at the reference and the light and so on, but first trying to understand the pose. So if you see around here, what I'm tending to do first is pretty much identify some shapes. Like if you see, like in the reference, this kind of a triangle schema that I really like, that creates this kind of triangle composition. And the second thing is I tend to try to understand what is the perspective and what is the light situation that I'm dealing with, right? So delete this one. Of course, I see from the building here that the perspective should be down there, here, almost here, as you can see, right? Almost here at his legs. And of course, then you can see this by seeing pretty much everything from the bottom up, pretty much here. And in order to also have a way to approximately, let's say, calculate the perspective here in this reference, you can use the wall, as I told you, the man's significant points, let's say like the shoulders, for example, like the pelvis here and the feet, and finally this line here. And when you do all the stuff, usually you understand, okay, we are in this perspective. Of course, it doesn't mean that you have to follow exactly the perspective that you have on the reference. After all, if you want to go away from the reference and create something on your own, it's okay to be in with the same, let's say, framework of the reference, but you can choose to exaggerate the perspective, exaggerate, let's say, this flow that you see here and so on. Another thing, I see this cool rhythm line here and this rhythm line here, and that will help me start making my sketch. So the first thing, of course, I do, as we said, is I'm making a sketch. So let's hide the stuff and let's go through the sketch step by step. The first thing I do for a sketch is, of course, I actually make all the stuff very close them down. So the first thing I do is I try to come up with a rough silhouette by defining the gesture of the silhouette, right? And as you can see here, I can show you the same lines, right, that I had before and I showed you before. In understanding the reference, I try to mark the same lines with the main reference that I have here on the left. And a cool trick with Krita is that you can have the references embedded on your file and you have all the stuff in your file and you don't have to drag them to another tool, external software tool. And at the same time, when you flip your canvas, like you show here, they are also flipping, so you can have, a correspondence between your reference and your painting. First thing is the silhouette, and then I go over the silhouette and try to step by step define some next steps, which would be more of a 3D shape, like I'm defining here the head here, and I know, for example, the head would be a circle, and I have the line here. And how I understand this is that even though he doesn't have in the reference, he doesn't show his face. I see the ear here, and that's the way that the ear is actually pointing down, and at the same time I'm seeing that his mouth is much lower than the ear. So the whole picture of his head shows me that the head is actually leaning down here. And I do similar measurements for identifying, for example, the arms, the legs, and so on. Over this now, I also lower my sketch, this one, and I go over and make my rough sketch, how I call it. I usually use this brush that I'm still having here selected, and about 60, maybe sometimes even more pixels. Why? Simply I don't want to go into more details. I just want to have indications of the stuff before I make my final sketch. And as you can see here, a lot of the clothes are still messy and so on. What I tend to do in this phase is try to stylize stuff and try to get away really from the reference and make my own style in some of the areas. For example, I see in the reference on the left there is this hoodie here, or this blouse that he wears, and I see there's a rhythm of the blouse where it's like an S thing. So I'm trying to exaggerate this by creating this rhythm here on my sketch. Or I decided in the middle of the sketch, of course, I needed to create a mask, right? Based on this references here. Then I will go and try to get away completely from this by having the knowledge that the head should be looking here to have a way to see the masks. And how I actually analyze the mask is pretty similar. Is I just take one of the masks and I try to see also the structure of the mask so I can use it in my sketch. For example, I know that this mask is coming like this, right? And like this, and then this side is like this. So I try to first, with my sketch, instead of going directly as you see here, because here you see the final result, but first I'm trying to pretty much create this shape, right? Create this shape and say, okay, I have the mask here and I need to actually divide it in the middle. And okay, the eyes, for example, are coming around here. Okay, then I can put a mark for the eyes here. And I know the nose will be coming down. So I'm just saying, okay, the nose will be around here. And then after I have this, I will just either take an eraser and try to make it a little bit more transparent and then draw above the different characteristics. For example, like the horns are coming here and here in the same perspective, since all of them are in the same perspective, as you can see. And then draw the nose right here and so on. And then this is how I go about in sketching. So if we delete this one, we are now on this phase, right? On this phase of the sketch. And it's time to go to the final sketch that we have. Again, similar process. I have 3-4 sketches until this point. And before I go to the final sketch, one thing that I do is also try to maybe already, if I have some ideas about composition, right, or how I can approach the composition in general, not just the character, implement them already. So I did have some ideas about, for example, Japanese characters, right, like fire or hope and so on. I just put them in, and also at the same time did some, let's say, lines around this. For example, like I have different lines done here. I had the idea to just put some motion on the sketch to give me some idea how the final composition could look like. So based on all the stuff, I just lower the opacity, and then I go slowly now with another brush, which is less pixels, and I will go and try to do a much more detailed sketch on top. And I usually try to keep the lines inside and the details in the sketch fairly small in terms of pixels, so I will just use this 32 pixels brush here, like as you can see on the top here. But then outside I will make my brush bigger and then try to have more bold lines, just to create this effect of the silhouette of the character. It's actually the most important thing, and then all the rest are details inside where you can go and look as a second look, right? So the first look, when you see it from far away, is immediately, okay, this is a character, right? And then when you go more and look at more, it has this pocket here, it has this from the dress, this hanging latches on the belt and so on, right? It has the mask, and so on. And this is how I tend to do some kind of line art in order to give emphasis first on the silhouette and then next on the details, pretty much. After this point, then the painting process starts, and I'll show you now how I address the background where you show in the last picture, in the final here picture. It's pretty simple. I didn't want to do a lot of stuff about background, but what I did is I just, with normal layers, I just first created the floor. And how I knew how to create the floor and where to put it, it's pretty much on the face of the horizon line right here. And I knew that the floor here has to come out in front of us like this, right? Because we are looking at the floor like this. And having this in mind, then I took a brush, very smooth brush, and I just took something like that, and I started painting with a smooth brush from here like this, right? And then I went higher in the values, and I started creating a gradient by having this and more gradient here. And the closer we were, the more high the value was here. So then this creates, let's say, the presentation that the floor is going more back, and as we go further closer to this line here, to the specific line, and the more closer we are, the more the floor is closer to us, as you can see also similar in the reference. So having in mind this perspective on the floor, it can help you on where to put your higher values and where you put your lower values, pretty much, because the floor, as it goes back, it becomes darker and darker and darker, right? Now it was about the light environment, the next thing in the background, and as you can see in the reference, he has kind of a lighting coming from this area, but it's very strong at this area, and then very, very quickly goes back to dark. So it's kind of a directed light at this specific point here, and then back goes to dark. Most probably because of the room that he's inside and so on. So I wanted to create the same feeling that there is a strong light coming from here, and then there is outside, there is no light. But I didn't want this contrast to be overwhelming, because the whole idea is to look at the character, right? It's not to look at the lighting environment. And I just made a gradient by simply, again, choosing the same brush here, the same smooth brush, which is the brush, this brush in Krita, which is the airbrush, basic brush is Krita, and then it actually created this gradient, right? Going a little bit darkened on the floor and much lighter because of the light source on the top. And the final thing that you saw, if you have seen the time-lapse on Instagram, it's I used some different kind of brushes in order to play around and create some effects. And pretty much I went and used something like this brush. And I just originally was starting with black, and I was doing some experimentation in doing this. Usually I will do this kind of experimentation until I find something that I like. And this is more of an exploratory process, that I will just make some brush strokes here, then I may go to the paint area of Krita and just grab some other brushes and do this kind of stuff. And then when I'm happy with the result, maybe, when I think it's something interesting, then I will most probably also go here and also change the different modes of the layers. And I did this, and actually I was bumping into this mode, which is divide, and immediately it created a strong contrast thing, because the background originally I had it like that, and it created a white contrast. And I thought, that's a cool idea, let's actually use white instead of black. And then I took this brush and I did this downwards brushes, which I already had from the sketch thought of. So, and that was the result that you have. Pretty much that's the background, very easy. It's something that you can do, in my opinion, in just a few minutes, and you don't have to overthink the background if your whole idea is to create a character. Then the other thing I do usually is I try to blend the character lines with the whole local layer, right? Local layer of colors. And why I do this? Because if you keep the black lines, unless you go for line art, it will be extremely difficult to blend all the lines with the black, and it will create muddy colors if you try to actually blend them by using a smudge tool and so on, like this one's here, like the smudge brush or the blender blur brush, and it will create much more muddy color. So I tend to actually use a color like a deep red, like this one, as you can see, right? And that blends better, especially if you have light colors that are closer to reddish tones, like the skin tones and so on. Then we go to flat colors, and I also explained it a little bit on my Instagram post. Is the whole idea for colors for this one was that I wanted to step out from this gray colors that I have here and go and create something on my own. So I wanted to have a triadic color. Here, what triadic means is you choose 3 colors, right? You choose 2 colors maybe in these areas, right? In these 2 areas, and another color from that is in the opposite area, pretty much more complementary to the other colors. And you need to choose which colors will play the role of the accent color, which means they are not going to be overwhelming for the character, and which colors would be the colors, the main colors that would be on the painting. That's why you see here I chose a lot of blues, right? A lot of blues here, a blue here, but here you see immediately I jump to the yellow one, because blue and yellow is kind of complementary, and then I have the red in the middle as let's say accent color for this painting. Pretty much, if you have seen, as I said in my Instagram, the color scheme of Superman, it's exactly the same scheme, and that's why it's commonly used color scheme, because it's also popping a lot between the blues and the yellows, which are opposite. They're complementary to each other, and the red being in the middle in order to be a kind of an accent color. That's why usually in Superman movies you will see the S being in the middle, and there's a lot of blues, but there is only a small yellow on here, which is the accent color. And this is how you can choose to do it. You can choose one accent color and the rest. So this is, of course, the red is the accent color, and there is a lot of yellow on the trousers, as even here on the inner blouse that he wears, right? He wears 2 stuff, like a jacket, blouse, and another one, and there is all some reds. The other thing is you need to control your saturation. I chose to use this one as a very saturated red because I wanted the biggest, let's say, emphasis, focus on the painting to be at his face. And then I choose to lower the saturation for the other reds, and even lower the saturation for the blues and the yellows, because the whole idea is you need to look at the mask, right? Because I spend a lot of time on the mask, so you need to look at it. So if you look from far away, immediately you say, okay, this red thing is popping here, right? Everything is kind of closer to the unsaturated color scheme on the rest, but this thing is actually popping here. And if you can also see it on the final result, not only because the light is coming here, but because this red is the most red of all the reds, and it's only mainly at the face, right? There are some other reds on the lines here that they guide you kind of towards this red. As you can see here, there is this line here, like starting from here, going here, and then moving up here for you. But the most red and popping thing, it's actually the face, right? Here already. So that's all about composition and colors, and let's go now through the process that I have. First of all, usually, as you know, I use a multiply layer for the shadows and overlay layer for the light to apply to the already existing local colors. So this is the layer that I used. Let me just show you how it's looking on itself, right, without any background colors. And as you can see here, I used 2 different colors for the multiply layer. And also this is a good way to also check to see, is it looking like a character from far away? And it's actually looking like the character from far away. And this is where you see I'm in a correct, let's say, road. I'm closer to my goal. If this is not looking like a character, like your character, most probably you're off shadows. Apart from the fact that actually to calculate proper shadows, right, you need perspective, but that's an indication if you're going the wrong way or not. Of course, when we have the light coming from above, mainly the shadows, as you can see, let me flip it on and off, are on the areas that are going towards down. And imagine here that the whole idea is, how I'm thinking is that this hand is like a, let's say, cylinder. The same here, right? This is all in the shadow. The same here with the leg, it's a cylinder. Everything here is in the shadow, and so on. And this is also where I used, for example, such references like this hoodie here to understand, okay, what is the structure of the hoodie? We have this, and we have some of the stuff coming here. This should not be in the shadow. This is a little bit more in the shadow. All this thing here is in the shadow, apart from this part, which may be a little bit more in the light, depending on the light, because the light is also quite similar here. It's also from above. And this is how I'm thinking on putting shadows and so on. Mainly, I'm thinking on bigger shapes, right? And bigger forms, because I'm not going to think about, okay, I have this very small shadow here, right, in the hand, and I need to have a look at the shadow. No, I'm thinking more about the bigger form. And I'm thinking that if I color pick here, right, and this is the value for this, and this should be higher, the value, right? This should be higher, and this is closer to red because it's closer to blue, and this is closer to yellow and higher. There's not so much difference because I don't want to push at this stage so much the contrast, because I want to build on top of this, right? Go slowly and build on top of this, but already I know that this whole leg should be in the shadow, right? Should be in the shadow, this whole leg. That's why this is a constant thinking you need to be doing in your paintings and saying, okay, what is my base value for this area? Is it closer to the light? Is it farther to light compared to this here? And having in mind that this is a direct light, which creates more of a, like in the reference, like a blown out effect on this areas, less effect on this areas, right? At all. Now we're going to the light, and again, seeing this, you see the light areas already. And as you can see, again, this effect now, it's being multiplied. For example, this is far higher in value, far higher in value. This is very low in value, right? And slowly starts to come to a mode that you can see slowly, okay, this whole side I'm seeing here, this whole side I'm seeing here should be in the light. This whole side I'm seeing here should be in the shadow. By gradually going to the shadow, right? Gradually going to the shadow. Light, less, 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 right? Almost black. All right, then this is the base, as I call it. This is kind of a base light and shadow layer. And then from this one, I merge everything together and I start painting in normal mode. Nothing magically is happening with layers from this point onwards, apart from the last steps, which I will explain. And this is where I want to show you now how to deal with the different materials, right? This material now, we need to go back to the reference and understand, okay, although there is kind of a blown out light, right? This material here, it's not really creating any highlights. It's not shiny, it's actually matte, and it's actually kind of a fabric. So we need to be careful to not completely blow it out, right? And say, okay, okay, I have this one here. I need to go to white, right? For example, and then go a little bit more to the area of the reds, because the light source is more yellowish. And then I go here and I create immediately blowing out this, because that would create the effect that if I do this here and start doing that, and I go out, you see, it's looking like a metallic shirt. And that's wrong, of course, because it's not metallic. It's actually matte. And that's why I have this ball here. And as you can see, there's also a little bit of grain and also a little bit of grain here. So there are some brush strokes showing the graininess and so on. So it's definitely not something that is very smooth. It's a fabric, and at the same time, it's not blown out. That's the first step in actually going through the blouse and understanding, okay, I need to understand that this whole structure and form goes like that, right? It goes like this, like that. And then this goes like this, and it's going away from the light, and this is completely away from the light. But here you see a little bit there is a little bit of light here compared to the other one, compared to the lower part of the blouse. So here, here, right? When we are done with the blouse, then we go to the rest slowly. Then we have the following things to worry about. I have two balls here representing the difference between the trousers, which is also fabric, like the shirt. And as you can see, still there is a graininess here, a lot of brushwork, there is this grain here and so on. But this one is much more, let's say, soft, and also goes very quickly to the lights. And it's saturated because this is less saturated here. But here the saturation is much, much greater. And here it goes very high in the values, right? You see it's very close to the yellows and also quite high. And this represents, of course, these two horns, which I decided to make them gold. And gold is a metallic thing that needs a lot of saturation and a lot of contrast. Contrast, when I say contrast, means that this value here, compared to this value, have a great range between them. So if I choose this one, is almost here, and this one is almost down here. There's a lot of contrast between them, and really the values drop significantly in a very small amount of area. And in order to achieve this, not only you start by taking, for example, a middle value here, right? A middle value here, and then you go and shift your values here, and then immediately you also go to white, right? Almost to white. But also at the same time, I usually use definitely some white in the soft brush to really have this glowing effect. But what I also use is color dots layer to actually push even some of the values, some of the saturation and the values in such a way that they will create this pop effect. So when I click this button here, which is a pass-through for Krita, and it actually applied this, you see there is a kind of a halo effect and popping effect on this. So this is what I used also here, and that's why I saved this color dots laid on the right, as you can see. And if I close it and I open it up again, and this is the other normal layer which I showed you with the soft brush and the white value. This is creating this halo effect and creating this kind of effect that when light drops on gold, right, and it touches gold, then the shininess gets created. And this is how you can actually create the shininess. So when you have your ball here, then at this area specifically, you just go almost white. You pick up a brush, a white brush, and you do this, like very, very gently, right? And then you pick up your color dots layer from here, and you do one more layer underneath the white, and you just create this color dots, and this will create this effect. You see this halo effect that it's a lot of light and your eyes are having this halo effect. That's all about the material of gold. Let's go to the next stage, where now I'm gonna explain how different shiny materials are being used here, right? So now the mask, what's the material of the mask? I mean, you can either choose to have a mask that is shiny, like this one, which I got inspired from, or this one, which is more plastic. So this is two references that I got inspired in order to create this mask. And I said, okay, let's make the mask like a smooth plastic material, like this one, because I don't want it to fight with the rest of the gold areas. So as you can see here, it's very, very smooth in all the areas. It's definitely not this kind of brush stroke. It's more, the grading is much more smooth and tries to emulate the plastic thing, like in the ball, right? Now this one that holds the sword itself, the plastic, let's say, box that holds the sword, as you can see here on the reference, is like a shiny plastic. So what I did is I went here and created this effect where it almost goes to white from black, right? And of course, as you can see here, the whole indication is that the form is something like that, right? Like a box form. And at this area, it's the highlights. These are the highlights area, and then slowly degrades back to black here. And this creates this effect that this is a shiny material that he uses for the sword. And I have also this one. I also chose to make a little bit of texture on this, just to show that maybe it's not completely manufactured, but it had actually scratches or kind of small stuff in order to not have a completely smooth surface, maybe from battle or something like that. Now the boots. The difference is that the boots, although they are shiny, they are not plastic, right? So there is, again, as you can see here, there is a lot of white, but the way that the boots are actually transitioning to black, it's much more diffused, right? There is black, there is, let's say, a layer of gray here, and there is white. But of course, in the layer of gray, there is no gray, a little bit higher gray, and higher value until we get to white. Is gray and white, right? Pretty much. So there is that significant difference again in the contrast, but a little bit different given than the actual shiny plastic material here. When you have this analyzed and in your mind understood, you can also apply it first maybe to a ball, which is going to be easier, and say, oh, I'm trying to do this diffusion gray here and see how it looks. Or does it look like this material on the left, right? It looks very close. Okay, so I'm good to go. I can just take this one and say, okay, this is this one, right? Oops, it's the same. This one is this one, and then create what I am seeing here based on what I see as a structure. And what you see as a structure, if you go to the reference pretty much, and let's just paste the reference here in order to analyze the structure of the boots, right? I have this structure here, and the light is coming here, right? And I have also some structure where this goes like inside, so it doesn't hit the light. But then after this, then we have this thing here, right? And you have a highlight here that gets diffused on this area, and then you have again going like this, then you have a little bit of structure here, and then you have more of a gradient here, and then you have this area here. So try to do this stuff on your reference, and if you cannot see it with your just your eyes and you don't need to design all the stuff around, I would suggest, if you cannot see it immediately, then it's a good thing to copy paste your reference here and say, okay, let me trace a little bit around, like what am I seeing here? Like here it will go in and then come out again, right? What am I seeing as a structure? And based on this, having this knowledge of the structure, you can also try to omit some stuff, right? And say, okay, maybe this is too much, right, for me to draw, because I don't want to give so much contrast here, or I don't want to give so much detail here because I want to point to the head, right? Or and also you can invent them, like, because if you know the structure and how it hits, and you know, okay, at this point here that there is this kind of corner gets created, then this is the highlight right here, right? So I know whenever there is a corner gets created, there is a highlight. And you can see such details even here, like this area here, which is a very, very small plane here, gets hit by the light and creates kind of a highlight here. So I hope this helps in order to understand more about the materials. And when you have all these materials done after your rendering, then we can see what I do at the last steps, right? Let's see now, what do we do for the last steps? Pretty much, if you can see the previous stage and this stage, you can see it a little bit, like the stage before is a little bit darker than this stage, right? So this is usually done when I go and check my values again, like before I make the final merge to one layer and start painting details like highlights and so on. I may see from far away again the painting, or does it look good and so on. And one thing you can do is use also black and white in order to see if your values are correct. And usually you do this by doing a shift Q in Krita, and this will create a proofing mode. And how you do this is you can configure Krita in order to create a proofing mode. Soft proofing, yes. So this is a way to actually use another mode in Krita, and this is called soft proofing, where you can find it in the actual color management. You can find it, and this is a way where you can choose another mode in order to compare with different modes. And this is a way, for example, you can compare with CMYK. If you are building something to be printed, right? So you can see how the colors are actually changing. But pretty much I'm using this because this is the more valid way to check your values. There are different ways to check your values, right? It's you can also add color layer and add 50% black and then check your values like this one. But you see what is creating, it's not really what you want. But the soft proofing mode, it's most probably the best, let's say, accurate mode in Krita to actually check your values by going to the configuration and doing the color management, going to soft proofing and then choosing grayscale and then just leave it at the default. And then also maybe if you want, you can also set a key. I have set the Shift Q as a key, and I can just click Shift Q and it will go to black and white. And still, if you are still in this mode, in the mode of soft proofing, right, and then see black and white values, and still you see if you do color pick, you will get the actual color and start coloring here, and it will be still red. So you're not losing your colors anymore, because if you're choosing the color mode and you color pick, then immediately you're just getting the value. And you can not do corrections like that. I hope this helps on checking your values. And how you can also change the values, of course, is I usually use a layer from the filters where I go to adjust levels, and then I will just push a little bit the whites, and then I can either create a filter mask so I can just see, okay, how is it before, right? And if I like it, or just immediately apply to the master layer. Another thing that I do usually is after I have adjusted my levels and so on, and I like it, I will duplicate my layer, this layer, and I will say, okay, I want to create another filter, and I will do a Gaussian high pass on edge detection, usually around 7 and 8. That would be the radius that I want to have. And I will set this as a soft light layer. This will enhance the silhouette and the hard shapes between the actual different planes that I want them to be enhanced. Because if we have a look here, if I make this invisible, you see it's a little bit more blurry. Then if I make it visible, it's more clear what's the difference between the character and the background. And having this, finally, I will merge everything together and do corrections. Some of the corrections that I did manually was compared to the previous one is I added more gold accents on the mask. And for example, I cleaned up a little bit of the edges. I cleaned up a little bit of some other areas. I've put some lights here as a bounce light. For example, I have made a little bit more high value the inner side of the mask, just to match a little bit possible light that is coming in and so on. Some final corrections before I finish up. That was pretty much what I wanted to explain to you guys here. I hope you liked this video and you actually found it useful. For those who have stayed until now, there is a quick time lapse coming up of this whole process that shows you all the, let's say, all the brush strokes and so on that I did. And of course, thank you so much for watching, and see you at the next one. you.